The Chicago rain pounded against my apartment windows, a relentless rhythm that mirrored the city's restless heartbeat. At 25, I was piecing together a life in a cramped studio, its creaky floors and hissing radiator a constant reminder of my budget. My job at a scrappy marketing firm was far from glamorous. Endless client emails, tight deadlines, and coffee runs, but kept my bills paid and my dreams of something bigger alive. For the first time in years, I felt like I was standing on my own, unshackled from the suffocating expectations of my family. Then my phone buzzed on the counter, the screen flashing a name that hit like a freight train. Mom. I hadn't spoken to her in nearly a year, not since her last attempt to guilt me into patching up our broken family. I let it ring, the name pulsing like a warning siren. The voicemail notification blinked, but I didn't listen. I knew her playbook: disappointment, manipulation, and that tone that made you feel like you'd failed her just by existing. Growing up in a Minneapolis suburb, my family was the kind that looked flawless in holiday cards. Dad, a high school principal, ran his school with a clipboard and a stern handshake, his authority seeping into our home like a shadow. Mom's catering business was her kingdom, a whirlwind of menus, client calls, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. My younger brother, Ethan, 2 years my junior, was the golden child, soccer team captain, straight-A student with a grin that could charm a snake. Then there was me, Claire, the oddball, always sketching in notebooks, blasting music through headphones, chasing dreams my parents called impractical. Our house was a suburban postcard: white picket fence, manicured lawn, neighbors who'd swing by with casseroles. But behind closed doors, it was a pressure cooker. Mom and Dad were always tallying who was working harder, who was falling short, and Ethan and I were stuck navigating their unspoken scorecards. Ethan was my anchor, though, or so I thought. We'd sneak out to the lake behind our house, skipping rocks under a velvet sky, or hunker down in the basement with popcorn and old horror flicks, laughing at the cheesy scares. He was my confidant, the one who got me when Mom's jabs about my art degree cut deep, or when Dad's silence felt like a verdict. We were a team, sharing secrets and dreams, or so I believed, until Lucas crashed into my life and blew it all to pieces. I met Lucas in a creative writing class at the University of Minnesota, my junior year. He was the guy who'd slouch in his chair, tossing out clever quips that made the room erupt, his dark hair falling over green eyes that seemed to see right through you. We started talking after class, then grabbing coffee at a dive near campus, then spending weekends lost in each other, driving to nowhere under starry skies, scribbling poetry on diner napkins, or stealing kisses in the rain. He was electric, the kind of person who made you feel like you were the only one in the world. After a year, I was all in, dreaming of a future with him. Maybe a little house, a dog, a life we'd build together. So, I brought him home to meet my family, thinking they'd see the magic I did. I couldn't have been more wrong. Mom greeted Lucas with her signature icy politeness, sizing him up like he was a used car she didn't trust. Dad was worse, grunted hello, gave a limp handshake, and vanished to his study to grade papers. Their disapproval hung in the air, but I brushed it off, telling myself they'd come around. Ethan, though, was a different story. He and Lucas clicked instantly, bonding over soccer stats, video games, and bad puns like they'd known each other forever. I was over the moon. Ethan's approval meant more than my parents', and seeing them kick a ball around in the backyard or trash talk over PlayStation felt like a victory. Lucas started coming over more, even hanging out with Ethan when I was stuck at class or my part-time gig at the campus bookstore. It seemed perfect, like my worlds were finally aligning. I trusted them both completely, my heart wide open. Why wouldn't I? Then came a night that broke me. It was a crisp Saturday in October, and I was at Lucas's dingy studio apartment, all peeling band posters and a sink overflowing with dishes. We'd spent the day binge-watching a new sci-fi series, curled up under a frayed blanket, and I felt safe, maybe even happy. Lucas said he was running out for pizza, planting a soft kiss on my forehead before grabbing his keys. His phone sat on the coffee table, buzzing once, then twice. I wasn't the type to snoop. Trust was my foundation. But something felt off, a splinter of unease I couldn't ignore. I picked it up, typed in his passcode, he'd shared it months ago, a gesture that felt intimate then, and opened his texts. The name at the top was Ethan's. My heart stopped. The messages weren't brotherly. They were intimate, secretive, laced with flirty banter and late-night plans I knew nothing about. "Miss you," Ethan had written with a heart emoji. Lucas replied, "Can't wait to see you." I scroll back, my hands trembling, and saw months of this. Text about sneaking around, photos they'd swapped, even a hotel receipt from a weekend I'd been visiting a friend in Duluth. My brother and my boyfriend betraying me in the worst way possible. The room spun, my breath catching as I took screenshots, sent them to myself, and deleted the evidence from his phone. When Lucas came back, I was gone, my bag slung over my shoulder, tears blurring the streetlights as I drove to my dorm. My phone lit up with his calls, then Ethan's, but I ignored them. I sent the screenshots to Ethan with one word: why? No response came. The next morning, I drove home, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. I didn't call ahead. I wanted Ethan to face me raw, without a chance to rehearse a lie. When I walked into the house, he was in the kitchen, munching toast like it was just another Saturday. Mom and Dad were there too, sipping coffee, flipping through the newspaper, oblivious to the storm I was about to unleash. I didn't speak, just set my phone on the table, the screenshots glaring like an accusation. Ethan's face drained of color, his toast hitting the plate with a dull thud. Mom snatched the phone, her eyes darting as she scrolled, her gasps slicing the silence. Dad's jaw clenched, but he stayed rooted to his chair. Ethan stammered, claiming it just happened, that he didn't mean to hurt me. I wasn't having it. I screamed, words pouring out like venom. How could he do this? How could he think this was okay? Mom tried to play peacemaker, murmuring about family discussions and working through this, but I was done with her platitudes. Dad finally spoke, his voice low, telling Ethan he'd crossed the line. That was it. No apologies, no real consequences. I grabbed my phone and stormed out, ignoring Mom's pleas to stay, her voice chasing me to the door. Back in my dorm, I blocked Lucas and Ethan, deleted their voicemails, and swore I'd never let them near me again. The trust I'd given, the life I'd built, was in shards, and I didn't know if I'd ever feel whole again. Cutting them off was like amputation, painful, messy, but necessary. I threw myself into school, piling on extra shifts at the bookstore to keep my mind from spiraling. My dorm became a sanctuary, walls plastered with sketches, music blasting to drown out the memories of Ethan's laugh or Lucas's smile. Lucas tried reaching out through mutual friends, spinning tales about how I'd misunderstood or overreacted, but I shut them down cold, my patience for lies burned to ash. Ethan's texts, when I unblocked him briefly to see if he'd own up, were just more deflections, no trace of remorse. Mom and Dad left voicemails about healing and forgiveness, their voices dripping with that familiar guilt, but I deleted them unheard. The only person I kept close was my cousin, Sarah, who'd moved to Chicago and saw through the family's polished facade. She'd text about her job at an art gallery, her latest dating disaster, or the stray cat she'd adopted, but sometimes she'd slip in updates about home. Ethan and Lucas were still together, she said, acting like nothing had happened, parading around like a happy couple at family gatherings. It stung, a sharp jab to the chest, but I told myself I was over it. I'd moved on. Then Sarah dropped a bombshell. She'd gone to a family barbecue I'd skipped, and Mom had been telling everyone I was struggling and needed time to find myself. Worse, Ethan had brought Lucas, and they were the stars of the show, laughing with aunts and uncles while Mom and Dad beamed like proud parents. Sarah said relatives were whispering about my absence, and Mom spun it like I was too wrapped up in my big city dreams to bother showing up. I was livid, my blood boiling at the audacity. They were rewriting history, casting me as the flaky, distant daughter while Ethan played the saint. I wanted to call Mom and tear into her, to scream that they didn't get to erase what they'd done, but Sarah talked me down. "They're not worth your energy, Claire," she said, her voice steady. She was right, but the betrayal burned, a reminder that my family cared more about their image than the truth. Months later, Sarah texted again with news that hit like a slap. Ethan and Lucas were engaged. Engaged. After everything, they were planning a wedding, and Mom was throwing a lavish engagement party, catered hors d'oeuvres, a string quartet, the whole 9 yards like something out of a magazine. Sarah said Mom had asked her to invite me, claiming it would mean everything to Ethan. I laughed, sharp and bitter, the sound echoing in my empty apartment. I told Sarah to say I was busy, that I had prior commitments. No way was I raising a glass to the people who'd knifed me in the back and twisted the blade. But the hits kept coming. Sarah overheard Mom at the party, fretting to a cousin that I needed to settle down soon because it looked bad that Ethan, the younger sibling, was tying the knot first. It was absurd, almost comical in its pettiness. I hadn't spoken to them in over a year, and they were still obsessed with how I fit into their perfect family portrait. It wasn't about me. It was about their reputation, about what the neighbors, their church friends, and the PDA moms would whisper over coffee. I told Sarah I didn't care, that their opinions were irrelevant, but the hurt lingered, a quiet ache I couldn't shake, like a bruise that wouldn't fade. I tried to build a new life in Chicago. I graduated, landed the marketing job, and moved into the city where the noise and chaos felt like a fresh start, a canvas I could paint on my own terms. I even started dating again, Mark, a graphic designer with a dry sense of humor and a steadiness that grounded me when my thoughts spun out. He'd cook me pasta when I was stressed, crack terrible puns to make me laugh, and listen when I needed to vent about the past. Things were good, or at least they were supposed to be. But every time I thought I was free, something dragged me back into the muck. Like when Sarah sent me a photo from Ethan's wedding, which I didn't attend. Ethan and Lucas in tailored tuxes. Mom and Dad grinning beside them like they'd won the lottery. Mom's social media caption reading, "Family forever." I wasn't in the frame, not even a mention. It was like I'd been erased, my absence a convenient blank in their carefully curated story. I stared at the photo, my chest tight, then deleted it. I didn't need their validation, I told myself. But the sting was there, sharp and undeniable. The call came on a Tuesday night, slicing through the hum of my apartment like a blade. I was halfway through a glass of cheap Merlot, skimming work emails on my laptop, when my phone rang. It was Sarah, her voice trembling, barely above a whisper. "Claire, it's your dad. He's gone. A heart attack, sudden and merciless, had taken him at 58, collapsing in his office at school." I sat there, the phone pressed to my ear, waiting for the words to make sense, for the world to stop tilting. Dad, and I hadn't been close, not really. He was always more comfortable with Ethan's soccer trophies and report cards on my sketchbooks and dreams. But he was still my dad, the man who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd slip me extra allowance when Mom wasn't looking. Sarah said Mom hadn't called me because she didn't want to burden me, didn't want to disrupt my life. I laughed, the sound hollow, echoing in the quiet of my apartment. My father was dead, and they couldn't even pick up the phone. I booked a flight to Minneapolis the next day, not for Mom or Ethan, but for Sarah and the part of me that needed to say goodbye, to make sense of a loss. Walking into the house was like stepping into a stranger's life, a museum of memories I no longer belonged to. Mom was in the living room, surrounded by aunts, uncles, and cousins, playing the grieving widow with a practiced grace that made my skin crawl. Ethan was there too, Lucas at his side, both of them staring at me like I'd crashed their private mourning. Mom's first words weren't a welcome or an apology. "You didn't have to come all this way," she said, her voice clipped, her eyes avoiding mine. I hugged Sarah, who whispered, "Just get through it, Claire." I nodded, but the air was thick with tension, like a storm cloud ready to burst. The funeral was a blur of black dresses, sympathy cards, and casseroles piling up in the kitchen. Neighbors and colleagues offered condolences I didn't want, their words hollow against the weight of my grief. Ethan and Lucas stayed glued together, accepting hugs and murmured sympathies like they were the ones who'd lost someone, their hands clasped like a performance of unity. Mom barely looked at me, too busy orchestrating the perfect service, flowers arranged just so, the right hymns chosen, every detail polished to impress. I stood at the edge of it all, an outsider in my own family, my grief a private thing I couldn't share with them. Sarah stayed close, her presence a lifeline, but even she couldn't shield me from the undercurrent of resentment that pulsed through the room. It was after the funeral, at the lawyer's office, that the real chaos erupted. Dad's was red, and I was floored, my breath catching in my throat. He'd left me 50% of his estate, savings, the house, investments, a small cabin up north, everything. Sarah got 20%, Mom got 20%, and Ethan got 10%. I hadn't expected a dime, not after years of distance, of clipped phone calls and unanswered emails. But there it was, in black and white, Dad's signature sealing his choice. The room went silent for a moment. Then Ethan exploded. He stood up, face flushed, shouting that I didn't deserve it, that I'd abandoned the family, that I'd run off to Chicago and left them behind. Lucas backed him up, his voice sharp, accusing me of swooping in for the money like a vulture. Mom stayed silent, her lips pressed into a thin line, but her silence screamed agreement, her eyes flicking to Ethan with a sympathy she never offered me. I sat there, my grief tangled with shock, as I turned my father's death into a battle over dollars and cents. The lawyer, a gray-haired man with a no-nonsense stare, shut it down, his voice cutting through the noise. "The will is airtight," he said, his tone final. "This is what your father wanted." But Ethan wasn't done. As we left the office, he grabbed my arm, his grip tight, his voice low and venomous. "This isn't over, Claire. You'll regret this." I yanked free, my heart pounding, but I wasn't backing down. This wasn't about the money. It was about what was mine, what Dad had chosen to give me, a final gesture from a man who'd never known how to say he cared. Back in Chicago, I tried to make sense of it all, but the weight of it was crushing. The inheritance was life-changing, enough to clear my student loans, buy a place, maybe even start a small art studio where I could finally turn my sketches into something real. But it came with a target on my back, a bullseye painted by the family I tried to leave behind. Ethan and Lucas hired a lawyer, a slick type in an expensive suit, claiming I'd manipulated Dad into changing the will, that I'd unduly influenced him in his final years. It was a lie, a desperate fabrication, and they knew it. Dad and I had barely spoken since I'd moved to Chicago, our conversations limited to stilted holiday calls. But that didn't stop them. My lawyer, Karen, a sharp woman with zero patience for nonsense, said their case was flimsy, built on hot air and resentment. But the legal fees were piling up, eating into the savings I'd scraped together. I was exhausted, caught between mourning Dad and fighting a war I hadn't asked for, my days a blur of work, court documents, and sleepless nights. Then the harassment began, slow at first, then relentless. It started with texts from unknown numbers, short, vicious messages calling me greedy, a traitor, a money-grubbing bitch who'd stolen from her own family. I blocked them, one after another, but they kept coming, new numbers every day, like a hydra sprouting heads. I'd wake up to voicemails from robotic voices, warning me to do the right thing, or give it up before it's too late. At first, I tried to shrug it off, to tell myself it was just Ethan and Lucas lashing out, but the volume was overwhelming, a constant drip of venom that eroded my calm. One night, I came home from a late shift to find my mailbox smashed open, papers from Dad's estate, legal notices, bank statements, scattered across the sidewalk, soaked by the rain. I gathered them up, my hands shaking, and called the police, but there was no evidence linking it to Ethan or Lucas, no fingerprints, no witnesses. The officer who took my report was sympathetic but blunt. "Without proof, there's not much we can do." Sarah called a few days later, her voice tight with worry. She'd been at a family gathering, a cousin's birthday, and overheard Lucas talking to an uncle, his voice low but sharp. "Claire's gonna pay for this," he'd said, his words dripping with intent. "She thinks she's won, but she's got no idea." Sarah warned me to watch my back, to be careful, and I could hear the fear in her voice, the same fear starting to coil in my gut. I didn't want to believe my own brother could stoop so low, could orchestrate something so vindictive, but the evidence was piling up, each incident a brick in a wall, closing me in. Karen suggested a restraining order, laying out the steps with her usual precision, but I hesitated. It felt like admitting they'd gotten to me, like I was scared enough to need a piece of paper to protect me. I wasn't ready to give them that power, not yet. Instead, I installed a security camera outside my apartment, a small black box that blinked reassuringly when I checked the feed. I started documenting everything, the text, the voicemails, the vandalism, saving screenshots and recordings in a folder labeled evidence. Mark was my rock through it all, cooking dinner when I was too stressed to eat, cracking terrible jokes to coax a smile, reminding me I was stronger than this. But even he couldn't stop the paranoia creeping in, the way I'd flinch at every shadow outside my window, every stranger who lingered too long on the sidewalk. Then came the letter, and it changed everything. It was slipped under my door one night, no envelope, just a single sheet of paper folded in half. The words were scrawled in black ink, uneven and angry. "You don't deserve it. Give it up, or you'll lose everything." The handwriting wasn't Ethan's or Lucas's. I'd know their sloppy loops anywhere. but it didn't need to be. I knew who was behind it, could feel their malice in every jagged stroke. My hand shook as I read it again, the words searing into my brain. I called Karen, who told me to bag it for the police, but I was done playing defense, done letting them terrorize me from the shadows. I hired a private investigator, a guy Karen recommended named Tom, with a gruff voice and a reputation for digging up dirt others missed. If they're pulling this crap, he said, I'll find the trail. I gave him everything, the texts, the letter, the police reports, and told him to do whatever it took. If Ethan and Lucas wanted to fight, I'd meet them on their level, and I'd win. Tom's report landed a month later, and it was worse than I'd imagined, a gut punch that left me reeling. Ethan and Lucas were drowning in debt. Credit cards maxed out to the tune of tens of thousands, a car loan they defaulted on, a second mortgage on their shiny new condo they couldn't afford. The inheritance was their lifeline, the only thing standing between them and financial ruin, and they were desperate, willing to do anything to get it. Tom had tracked down a lowlife they'd paid to tail me, a guy with a rap sheet and a cheap camera, snapping photos of my routines, me leaving for work, grabbing coffee, walking with Mark. The smashed mailbox, the threatening texts, the voicemails, the letter, it was all them, orchestrated through burner phones and shady contacts Tom traced to a dive bar on the edge of Minneapolis. He'd even found emails between Lucas and a sketchy consultant discussing ways to pressure me into giving up my share, complete with veiled references to escalating if I didn't comply. I sat in my apartment, the reports spread across my coffee table, and felt a mix of rage and nausea. My own brother, the kid I'd shared secrets with, who'd cried in my arms when our dog died, was orchestrating a campaign to break me. I took the evidence to the police, my hand steady now, and they issued a warrant for Lucas's arrest, harassment, stalking, and conspiracy, with more charges pending. Ethan wasn't named in the warrant, not yet, but I saw him at the courthouse a week later, his face pale, eyes avoiding mine as he sat beside Lucas's lawyer. He knew the walls were closing in, that Tom's report had cracked their facade wide open. The restraining order was granted, a judge's signature making it official, but it didn't end the chaos. Mom called 2 days later, her voice thick with tears, begging me to drop the charges, to think of the family, to be the bigger person. I listened for 10 seconds, her sobs a performance I'd seen too many times, then hung up, her voice still echoing in my head. Sarah called soon after, her tone heavy. Ethan was spinning a new story, telling relatives I'd framed Lucas, that I'd fabricated the evidence to steal the inheritance and ruin their lives. Some believed him, she said, especially the older aunts who'd always seen Ethan as the perfect son. I didn't bother correcting them. Let them cling to their delusions. I was done with their lies, done trying to fit into a family that had erased me long ago. The estate was finalized a month later, the funds transferred, the house put up for sale, the cabin signed over to me. I used my share to buy a small condo in a quiet Chicago neighborhood, far from the noise and the memories. It had big windows, a tiny balcony, and enough space for a desk where I could sketch again, maybe even start that studio I dreamed of. Mark moved in, his art books mixing with mine on the shelves, his quiet strength a reminder that I wasn't alone. We started building something real, something untouched by my family's poison. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. But the fear didn't vanish, not completely. I checked my security cameras obsessively, my phone synced to the feed, jumping at every notification. I'd flinch at every creak in the building, every unfamiliar face in the lobby. Sarah kept me posted on the fallout. Lucas was out on bail, but Ethan had gone quiet, cut off from most of the family, humiliated by the scandal that had spilled into public view. Mom still played the martyr, telling anyone who'd listened that I'd chosen money over love, that I'd torn the family apart for my own gain. I let her. I had my home, my life, my truth, and no one could take that away, no matter how many lies they spun. Last month, a package arrived at my condo, and it brought the fear roaring back. No return address, just a plain brown box left by my door. Inside was a USB drive, nothing else, no note, no explanation. I hesitated, my pulse racing, then plugged it into an old laptop I kept for emergencies. I didn't care about losing to a virus. The screen flickered and a video loaded, grainy but unmistakable. Ethan, sitting in a dimly lit bar, his face flushed with alcohol, talking to a guy I didn't recognize, someone with a shaved head and a leather jacket. She's stubborn, Ethan said, his voice slurred but sharp. Thinks she's untouchable, but she'll break. We just need to push harder, find the right leverage. The video cut off abruptly, but the message was clear. They weren't done, not by a long shot. I sat there, the laptop's glow casting shadows on the walls, and felt a chill settle in my bones. This wasn't just a threat. It was a promise, a glimpse into Ethan's mind, his refusal to let go. I called Tom, the PI, and sent him the video, asking him to trace the package, to find out who'd sent it and why. He's working on it, digging through shipping records and bar surveillance, but he warned me it could take time. Karen's on it too, filing to strengthen the restraining order, pushing for more charges based on the video. Mark thinks we should move, start over somewhere new, maybe Seattle, where he has a cousin, or Portland, where no one knows my name. I've thought about it. Picture a life where I don't jump at every noise, where I'm not always looking over my shoulder. But I'm not running, not now, not after everything I've fought for. This is my life, my home, my truth, and I've clawed my way through too much to let them take it. I don't know what's coming next. Maybe Ethan will back off, slink away under the weight of his own failures. Maybe he'll escalate, find new ways to come at me, new allies to carry out his vendetta. But I'm not the girl who drove home with screenshots 2 years ago, shaking with betrayal, her world in ruins. I've lost a family, a father, a version of myself I'll never get back. I've grieved for the brother I thought I knew, for the parents who chose appearances over love, for the life I thought I'd have. But I've gained something too, strength, the kind forged in fire, the kind that comes from surviving the worst and coming out the other side. No one controls me anymore. Not Ethan, not Lucas, not the ghost of what my family used to be. I'm standing my ground, my roots sunk deep into the life I built. If they come for me again, I'll be ready, armed with evidence, with allies, with a resolve they can't break. They'll learn the hard way. I'm not bending, not folding, not running. I'm Claire, and I'm not breaking, not now, not ever. One intense story of betrayal, resilience, and standing your ground. What do you think of Claire's journey? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever faced a similar challenge? And how would you handle it? If this story hit home, give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and hit that subscribe button to catch more gripping tales. Don't forget to ring the bell, and we'll see you in the next video.